Hey, I'm getting ready to read Chapter 10, Part 2 of Trouble According to Humphrey. And last we left off, Humphrey was really worried. For the rest of the day, I stared through the bars of my cage and imagined myself looking through another set of bars. The bars on a jail cell. Would Og end up there with me too? After all, he was a classroom pet, although he didn't go home with the students on the weekends. At the end of the day, Principal Morales helped Mrs. Brisbane cover my cage and carry Og and me out to the car. Thank goodness the rain had stopped. They brought along our food, including Og's icky, yucky crickets. Luckily, it was cold, so they were quiet in the car. I'm really sorry about this, Sue, the principal told Miss Brisbane through the car window. My husband will be thrilled to have these two with him, but I'm afraid my students will be very disappointed. Very, 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 I thought. I'll try to get this resolved as soon as possible, Mr. Morales promised. Mr. Morales promised. Miss Brisbane thanked him and rolled up the window. Soon we were on our way to our house, but for how long? Just as she said, Mr. Brisbane was really glad to see us. Mrs. Brisbane honked the horn and he came out to the driveway in his wheelchair to meet her, even though it was extremely cold. Put Humphrey's cage right here across the armrest, he told his wife. I'll come back and get Og. Okay, I'll bring in the food. Soon Og and I were side by side on the Brisbane's wide coffee table. It was warm and cozy in their house, and before long Mr. Brisbane had everything in my cage and Og's house in tip-top shape. Miss Brisbane came in with steaming cups of tea, and the two of them sat and watched us as they drank it. This Payne family sounds like a nuisance, said Mr. Brisbane. I don't know much about them. Mandy complains a lot, but she's a nice girl. I think it's a habit she's picked up. Maybe she has a lot to complain about, Mr. Brisbane said. Yes, 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 I said, hopping on my wheel and spinning to get their attention. Whatever their problems are, they don't have to take them out on Humphrey, do they, buddy? Mr. Brisbane wiggled a finger through the bars of my cage. Mrs. Brisbane picked up the phone and called Art's mother. I'm checking to see how Art is doing. I heard her say, we missed him in school. I would have loved to say what Mrs. Patel was saying. I would love to hear what Mrs. Patel was saying. Miss Brisbane said, oh, I'm sorry. And what did the doctor say? She listened and said, did Art show any signs of illness right after Humphrey was there? I held my breath while she waited for Mrs. Patel to answer. This is private, but since you're a room mother, I'll tell you that a parent has complained that having Humphrey at her house made her whole family sick. He and Og are temporarily banned from the classroom. Art's mother answered so loudly even I could hear her say, that's ridiculous. I know, Mrs. Patel, but we have to check this out. No, I can't tell you who it is. A number of students were absent today. I'll let you know, and I think you should keep Art home another day. After a polite goodbye, Mrs. Brisbane hung up and turned to her husband. He has a bad cold. Her husband got it first. Everyone in his office has had it. Well, they didn't catch it from Humphrey, Mr. Brisbane said, setting his cup down hard. No, she was terribly upset. You can imagine how the children would feel. I'll call the Hoppers. After a short talk with Heidi's mother, Miss Brisbane told her husband that Heidi also had a bad cold, but that she had gotten soaked in the rain 2 days before. Humphrey had nothing to do with that. He hasn't even been to her house, Mr. Brisbane insisted. You know, I think I'll make another call to the Paynes. The Paynes? I wouldn't talk to that pack of troublemaker. Now, Bert, you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, you know. Sometimes humans say the strangest things. Why was she calling the Paynes about catching flies? Og might be interested, but not me. That is a silly expression, if you don't mind me saying so, dear, said Mr. Brisbane. Miss Brisbane laughed. You're right. I've never understood why anyone would want to catch flies, except the baseball outfielder. Bert laughed at this joke, and so did his wife. Although I didn't understand it at all. Of course, I've never been to a baseball game. Before I could figure it out, Mrs. Brisbane decided to call the Paynes. I held my breath again while she waited for someone to pick up. Hello, is this Mr. Payne? This is Miss Brisbane, Mandy's teacher. How's Mandy feeling? She and Mr. Brisbane had a long exchange about Mandy's health and the health of Tammy, Pammy, and Brian. Then she said, "Well, I certainly hope Mandy will be back in the classroom soon. We all miss her." She paused to listen for a while longer. "The animals are home with me, and we're looking into it. Please give Mandy my best. By the way, is Mrs. Payne there? I'd like to talk to her." Mr. Payne gave a short answer this time. "I see. Well, please tell her I called. Thank you. Goodbye." Mrs. Brisbane hung up the phone and took a long sip of tea. "What do you say?" Mr. Brisbane was not a patient man. At that moment, I was not a very patient hamster. "It sounds as if they all have codes like Art. When I asked Mrs. Payne, I learned something new. Mrs. Payne works at night." "That could be hard on the family," said Mr. Brisbane. I had to squeak up. It is. Especially Mr. Payne, since Mr. Payne lost his job." Mr. Brisbane burst out laughing. "I think Humphrey is trying to tell us something." Miss Brisbane became more serious. "I wish we could understand him. After all, he spent a whole weekend there. I'll bet he could tell us a lot." Boy, she was right. I could write a book about the Paynes. If I only had room left in my notebook. It was pleasant in the Brisbane's house. They took me out of cage and made a maze for me to run on the floor, but my heart wasn't in it. After the second time around, the phone rang, and Mrs. Brisbane answered. "Aldo, is everything all right?" She listened for a few seconds, then replied, "Sorry, I should have left a note for you. Of course you'd be worried." "No, I have Humphrey and Og for a while. Frankly, there was a complaint about Humphrey making one of the students sick, but please don't tell anyone, not even Richie's family. I don't know how long they'll be here." She laughed. "I will definitely give them your regards." Once she hung up, Mrs. Brisbane told Og and me that Aldo missed us. "How could he happen to have our number?" Mr. Brisbane asked. "I gave it to him when he was trying to decide to go back to school in case he had questions. He's going to make a great teacher." Yes, Aldo would make a great teacher unless he fell asleep on the job, and now I wasn't there to wake him up if he was tired. I hope he had a lot of coffee with him. When she was ready to go to bed, Mrs. Brisbane brought me a slice of apple, but it didn't appeal to me. "I'm not hungry. Are you, Og?" I asked my friend a little later. "Boing," he answered. For the rest of the night he was quiet. The crickets were quiet. I was quiet too. My brain wasn't quiet, though, as I thought about the next day, when I would be absent from the class for the first time. It felt so strange to see Mrs. Brisbane head off for school. I couldn't imagine room 26 without me. I could imagine it without Og, since I was there before he was. But I'd never seen room 26 without me in it. How could I? As the day went on, I tried to picture my classmates having math class, doing their school jobs, working on Humphreyville, named for me. As the day went on, I tried to picture my classmates having math class. I just read that paragraph. Mr. Brisbane tried to keep my mind off school by giving my cage a terrifically good clean, though he did uncover a secret. "Humphrey, I don't think you've been eating your food. You've just been hiding it." I hung my head because it was true. Ever since Miranda got in trouble, I hadn't been hungry. My yummy treats didn't taste yummy anymore. "If you don't eat, you'll get sick, Mr. Brisbane. Now I'm going to give you some yogurt drops right now, and you're going to eat them." "Yes, sir," I squeaked weakly. Mr. Brisbane headed his wheelchair for the kitchen, then abruptly stopped. "Wait a second. Maybe you are sick. Why didn't I think of this sooner? You need to see a veterinarian." I was puzzled, trying to figure out why a veterinarian could help. I'm practically a veterinarian myself because I only eat fruits, nuts, and vegetables. I've heard of hamsters who like a bit of meat on occasion. Soon, Mr. Brisbane whizzed back into the room with some crunchy, munchy yogurt drops. "Eat up, my boy. You have to get your strength up. You can't give in to troubles. You have to fight back." Was that really what I was doing, giving in to troubles like Mr. Brisbane had done the first time I met him? I reached down and took a yogurt drop and ate it. It tasted good. I realized I was hungry, so I took another one. "That's a good fellow. You've got plenty of fight left in you, haven't you?" A few more yogurt drops, and I felt a little fight coming back. "I'll call the neighbors to get the name of their vet, and I'll make you an appointment. You'll be back in the classroom before you know it." Mr. Brisbane seemed determined, but Mrs. Payne was determined too. Once Mr. Brisbane went off to make his calls, I asked Og, "Don't you miss school, old pal?" The frog, who usually sat like a large green lump, began to jump up and down, twanging loudly, "Boing, boing, 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 boing." I took that to be a yes. Humphrey and Og missing from room 26. Miss Brisbane says they are safe at her house. No explanation for their absence is given. The Humphreyville Herald. And that's the end of chapter 10. We will read chapter 11 tomorrow.